gallons. Volunteer is 20 million gallons. So between the two of them, they add about another full day's worth of emergency response. That's a lot. And so I think we're really wanting to be very careful about this analysis, making sure we're making the right decision, because once we release a surplus property to the process for surplusing, we don't get it back, without having to expend an absolute premium later on down the road, especially in a well-developed city like Seattle here. So I think I've probably talked long enough here. The next steps for us are to complete the seismic study. So by the end of next year, we'll have a much better sense of where storage fits into all of our calculations. Unfortunately, that means that for the Roosevelt Reservoir decision, it will have to be put off for a while longer. So the 2-year decommissioning period we came and talked to you about previously, that's over, but we are now in another evaluation period for the seismic analysis. Now when that's all done, we will be very happy to come back and talk to you more about the results of the study, the recommendation for Roosevelt, and volunteer if you're interested as well, and then talk about the next steps here. If there's a surplus decision, we can talk about next steps, but we're not ready to do that at this point. Yeah,
so
questions?
if you were to keep the Roosevelt Reservoir in the system and updating it for future needs, future usage, would you be lidding it? Would you be putting it underground?
Potentially, yeah. We're still looking at all the options on the table, and so for example, for volunteer, one of the options might be lidding it. That is, keeping the existing structure more or less and putting a concrete lid on top. For those of you who are familiar, volunteers, it's a historic kind of feature with a mirror view of downtown Seattle. When you look through the Asian Art Museum, through that area, it's got a nice mirror. So another option would be to relocate it to a different area, because we have area that's been targeted for a new reservoir and volunteer area. For Roosevelt, it's a little more complicated, so one of the options would be to lid it. Another option might be, for example, to downsize it and put a lid on the downsized area and surplus the rest, or keep the rest of the area for other water department needs, because that whole area does serve as a bit of a junction for a lot of our pipes and pumps. Another option could be looking at the need for non-potable storage. So keeping a certain amount of water, whether it be at Roosevelt or other locations, that's not treated water, but could be used in a real dire emergency to connect into the water system to make sure that hydrants actually run water, whether it's drinkable or not, so that fires can be fought. So all of these things are on the table, and it's a little too early to talk about that for me. Yeah.
Would that alternative include looking at ways of taking some amount of water out of Green Lake or other natural sources?
It could, and that is a possibility. You can really do anything. We have a lot of water close by that could be used for fighting fires. You could have the fire department set up with equipment so that they could put hoses into Green Lake and fight fires a couple of blocks away using their pumper trucks. You could set up a pumping system that would pump directly into the drinking water system so that water would be available for hydrants in the many block area around that area. I think all those options are feasible. There's probably some more difficult decisions to be made if we were to make a decision to pump out of Green Lake, pump out of Lake Washington, based on environmental, technical issues, maintaining equipment that's not used very often. Emergency pumps, for example, are great in theory, but we have to maintain them all the time, and the size that would be required would be fairly large. So I can tell you it'd be considered, but it may not be the most feasible option. Question in the back.
The covering of the parks, you mentioned that it's EPA mandated. Are there federal dollars that are available to help cover the cost of that covering, or is it borne entirely by the upstream utilities?
Typically, there's a combination. So as a utility, we'll pay for large projects through a combination of asking the federal government or the state government for grants, which are very few and far between. or loans. There's a low interest loan pool that we used, for example, to help with the maple leaf construction. So that's a 0 or 1% loan that can be paid back over several decades. And then for everything else, we'll pay for that out of a combination of ratepayer dollars for that year, and then bonding, selling water system bonds that last for 30 years, and right now the interest rate's about 3.5%, 4%. So we'll look at that kind of funding mix for sure. Yeah, questions?
It wasn't clear to me in your diagrams whether you incorporated shedding all the east side communities or not.
Yes, so Dan, you mind going back to the system map?
One of these ones?
Yeah, a couple back actually, the major system map. This one here, yeah. Right, so the storage that I'm talking about, the 250 million gallon storage, that's only here. That's all that is. There's a separate storage discussion going on among all of our 24 or so wholesale customers, how much storage they think they should
We're
have.
not gonna purvey to them after a while, are we?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question?
We're gonna shed them as we're not gonna sell them water come 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, so there's actually two questions in one there. The direct question is, right, for many of our wholesale customers, we have long-term contracts with them and no intent to take them off the system. We have 60-year contracts with them, starting 2000. There is one set of customers called the Cascade Water Alliance, Bellevue, and a couple of others who've banded together in the name of better pricing. Their intent is to come off of our system in about 2035 or so progressively and find a new source of water. However, the other question is storage. It's just the storage amount. How much storage of water do you have here in the event that you lose this source or that source or both? And that was the numbers I was giving you of 70 million gallons, 80 million gallons a day use, and then 250 million gallons a day storage without Roosevelt and Volunteer. Yes, question, yeah.
Is there any discussion going on about increasing mountain capacity by raising current dams and possibly building new ones?
Well, that's a separate discussion from what we're talking about here, but I can certainly answer the question. And we've just been through a pretty unusual year in terms of water supply. So we were able to fill our reservoirs this spring. We drained them down fairly quickly this summer because it was so unexpectedly hot and dry, much more so than weather forecasters predicted in March, April, May, June, and beyond. So I guess the question really has to do with this part of our system storage rather than that part, which is the Roosevelt part. But the answer to this question is sure, we're definitely looking at that. Our last analysis said that even with climate change impacts, this system was able to serve our needs until about 2060 or maybe beyond. But we have some long-term options dialed up to expand that capacity when that need comes calling. Either making more flexible use of these facilities, or adding new storage, or reducing demands through more aggressive conservation measures. It's all part of the program.
Alex, can you stay with us for a little bit longer
Of
this
course,
evening? We're
yeah.
gonna move the program
Okay.
along, but this is fantastic, and I know there's gonna be some other questions for you. One more?
About the lid, can you use a floating lid, or are you required to have a concrete structure with a park on top? And did the maple leaf lid leak? Because I thought I heard that it did.
Yes, I can tell you all about it. I've been in it many times, and we've had multiple issues that we've had to manage. We can, technically, yes. In order to meet the regulations, you could put on a floating cover. It's essentially an industrial swimming pool cover. That's what we've done at Bitter Lake Reservoir up north and Lake Forest Park. But the city ordinance, the intent of it is, back then when Mayor Nichols signed it, and the other mayors since have supported it, is to provide more open space for the city. So if we were to cover Roosevelt, that's our intent, to provide a concrete cover with soil on top, work with the Parks Department to develop public use.
Did the maple leaf lid leak?
Yes, it did. There's actually a couple of things that we're dealing with. The leakage with, oh, sorry, not my mistake, not maple leaf. Beacon and Myrtle had leakage problems because the waterproofing was there was problems with the specification from the design engineer, and there were issues with the construction. And we ended up taking all of the waterproofing off of the reservoir lid and putting on a beefier system, and had to deal with our lawyers for how to pay for that and make our ratepayers whole. But we learned our lessons from that and applied those to Maple Leaf and to West Seattle reservoirs. So is that the answer to your question you're looking for?
Yes, I mean, can this actually be done and not putting soil on top of drinking water?
It absolutely can be done without leakage, but it has to be designed properly, constructed properly, and operated and maintained properly.
How long have the Beacon Hill, the lids that have leaked, Maple Leaf and Beacon Hill, I believe, how long have they been in place?
Since 2008, 2009. And so we'll go in and look, we clean the reservoirs every couple of years, do a full inspection, floor, walls, columns, roof, to look for any issues.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Clearly, we know the right Please do hang around. We've got one more speaker. Ainsley, would you like to help us enter the next phase? You know, so much of the rest of the conversation, really all of the rest of the conversation, is contingent upon the things that Alex put out. And yet I know that the interest is so high in what could happen, and that's why most of you are here. So I think it's fair to have some conversation. I think that SPU is probably interested in what we have in mind, but I think we've all learned a lot about process and kind of inflection points. So another valuable member of the Land Use Academy planning team is Ainsley Close, and Ainsley has brought to tonight's meeting another key resource that's going to talk to us a little bit. Ainsley, what do we got in store?
Oh boy. So tonight we have Chip Nevins, who's with the Parks Department, and he is the acquisition manager for the Parks Department. And as Jim and I have been talking a lot about this process and kind of how we would love to see ourselves being leaders kind of before SPU goes through the decommissioning, I had a wonderful chat with Chip, because he's my friend, about Frula Park and if Parks is ever interested in any expansion. And so brought him tonight, and just want to thank you so much, Chip, for coming out.
Oh, thank you. So you can see that obviously no decisions can be made right away about this park, but I thought we'd just go tell you a little bit about my experience with the Parks Department and kind of what our process is for both buying and expanding park space in Seattle. So I've been with the city about 10 years, on and off for about 20 years, but about 10 total. And most of that time I've been working on, well, all of that time I've been working on open space and park acquisitions. For the last 10 years, really working with the 2008 Parks and Green Spaces Levy to buy neighborhood parks throughout the city. We bought neighborhood parks in about 14 neighborhoods and green spaces throughout the city. That program is winding down. As you know, we have a park district that got voted in, and that starts up in the beginning of the year. And the focus of the park district is really different. Both the last two levies were really on buying new stuff, buying and developing new stuff. We bought, in the last 20 years, we've brought dozens of parks, and we've developed and expanded dozens of parks. The park district is really about taking care of what we have. There's a strong statement from everybody when we did all our public meetings getting up to the park district that what people wanted to see was us taking care of our major backlog, doing better maintenance of our facilities, etc. I guess that's a long way of saying that we don't have a lot of money for buying new parks, and so this is an important question. If something like the Reservoir comes up for sale or comes surplus, what happens? What's the process that we'd go through, or you would go through? I guess I'll start out by just saying the existing facility there, Frula Park, is about 2.5 acres, and we don't own it. We own about 5,000 square feet of. We own one little lot that was donated to the city about 50 years ago. The rest of it is owned by SPU. We manage it. We have no agreement with SPU. been this way for 50+ years. We just manage it as a park facility. So I think one thing that's interesting, if the property was surplus, we'd actually have to buy Frula Park, because that would now go to the market or come to us. And obviously, we have a facility here that's in a place that needs properties and needs a park facility. So if the reservoir was surplus, I think our first thing we try to do is to at least save what we have. We're always interested in expanding parks. I think that bigger is usually better. A lot of our parks are too small. So, and I always tell people, sure, we would think if it became available, we would think about expanding. Would we think about the whole thing? I think that's a really political thing, because we do not, the department does not have that kind of money, and it probably will never have that kind of money. That's it's really a city decision. But I never rule anything out. Political decisions are really based more on you than me. So I think the biggest opportunity really is if SPU decides that they want to keep the facility. You just heard them say that we've partnered with them on many of their new lidded reservoirs, and so that if they decide they need this capacity and they are going to put a hard lid on it, there is an opportunity for an expanded park for the cost of development. So we pay for development of the park space, but they've provided the lid and the space. So I think really that is kind of the best opportunity for expanded parks in this area. I guess I'll just end there and take any questions.
Is there any idea of what the current value in today's dollars are for the reservoir, or even just for the existing park portion of that?
I don't know, do you have any?
We haven't done that analysis, but typically we're required by city ordinance to sell for fair market value, and so we have a property assessor look at the typical process to determine what that fair market value is. We haven't done that yet.
How many acres is there?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. I can get back to you though.
Well, you wouldn't sell Frula Park though, would you?
You're putting me in a tough spot here. I don't have the answers in terms of surplus property.
I think as a city, we see the value of having a park facility in that area. Though, one thing I failed to mention, people often ask, how do we decide where we're going to buy parks? And we do a strategic plan updated every 5 years, and we really base it on two things. One is, and the one we really rely on is distribution. So having a park within walking distance for everybody in the city. And it depends upon the density of the areas, what that distance is. In our urban villages, you know, it's about a quarter mile, 8 to a quarter mile. In the single family neighborhoods, it's about a half a mile. Obviously, we've got problems, you know, with topography and arterials that make that a challenge. But we really focus on making sure that there is facilities within walking distance. We do also have one for acres per population, but we find that as we grow, as the city grows and the available land shrinks, that metric is really less important, because people are really interested in not so much the size of their parks or how much park space they have. They're interested if they have a good quality park that they can walk to. Any other questions? One in the back there?
The park, the arrangements where you have kind of like Maple Leaf Reservoir, for instance, where you have a park on top of a covered reservoir. Is that SBU owns that particular portion and you maintain it similar to the Frula arrangement, or is it different setup?
No, it's pretty much that. They own the property. We have an agreement. We have an agreement that we can put park improvements on it and maintain it. If they ever need it back for water use, we would have to vacate it. We also have a formula among all the SPU park properties about what the value of that is, and so far we've kind of, you know, they use some of our property, we use some of their property, so it's kind of all balanced out. But it's not like they're giving it to us for free. I mean, there is anyway, it's kind of quid pro quo.
What's the process for deciding what to do with the park space? Because the Parks Department manages more than just, you know, open space. There are community centers and other things that are, you know, so how does that fit into the whole equation of deciding what parks would do with the property?
Okay, so that's a couple different questions. One, you know, I was talking about how we go about buying new park space, and we use it as a, you know, kind of distribution. The same thing for all our facilities is we're updating the community center plan, which is gonna look at what parts of the city are missing community centers, and what might be the strategy for either putting one there or expanding the use of a different one. We have similar metrics for playgrounds and tennis courts and swimming pools. So that's kind of how we view where we put it, where we would locate things. As far as specific parks though, unless we're gonna put one of those specific facilities on it, we really look at the neighborhood and say, we have this park, what do you want or need here? I mean, so the design of park space is really a public process. We don't come into it with a preconceived idea of what should be there.
Do you have a similar arrangement with the school system as you do with the Parks Department for sharing land?
We have, someone was telling me the other day, 38 separate agreements with the school district about joint use of spaces. And we have an overall joint use agreement. So yes, they use some of our space, we use some of their space.
That was the perfect lead-in question. As every parent in the area knows, our public schools are incredibly overcrowded and growing by 500 to 1,000 students north of the Ship Canal every year. And we expect thousands more students in this area where we have no school capacity. This is much a question for SPU as for parks, in terms of have you had discussions with Seattle Public Schools about the fact that we have no land available other than this is the one area in all of Northeast Seattle that's been identified as possible public school space to meet the elementary. We actually need 2 middle schools, 2 high schools north of the Ship Canal in the next few years as well. So if you had those discussions, and would Parks be able to partner, and has SPU talked?
Well, I think, I'll speak for SPU. I think it's well known in the city that the school district is looking at that site as a possible location. You're right, there's no big spaces, so if it became available and they decided they needed capacity, I would imagine that they would want to put a school there. The site is bigger. There can be multiple uses on that site. Certainly they don't need that whole site, and we do partner with school district on there's probably half a dozen schools where we actually own the playground. There's actually some schools where they own the playground and we own the school property. But it's a challenge though, because and they tend to work. The challenge is that they close off the playground during school hours to the public, and since we're Parks Department, it doesn't sit well with a lot of people. But those have worked, and I think we would continue. If it all happened to fit at this space, we would continue that partnership.
Alex, you have anything to add about the school district?
We've certainly fielded calls from the school district and others, many others, both governmental and many private sector folks very interested. But our response has really been, until we're through this period, we don't want to start any surplusing discussions or property acquisition discussions. We want to have a fair and balanced process, go through the process as mandated by city ordinance. So we have not gone anywhere with that.
And I'll just add that I did speak with the school district about a week and a half ago. I don't think we have anybody here from the district tonight. You're welcome to comment, but as Chip mentioned, they acknowledge very readily, yes, they're aware of the site, yes, they have their eyes on it. They didn't say, we want it, we're going to take it, nothing like that. There's a lot of funding issues with the district. They're running levies of different types. You'll see some in February. A levy that would run in 2019 would possibly raise the funds for new building construction, but it's part of the mix, to be sure. And the school district has invited us, the community, whomever, to submit questions. And I'm going to be thinking about that, and if you've got specific questions here tonight, we'll do it. One of the questions I would have for the district would be, what experience do you have in multiple uses? Well, you've educated us to know that there are some interesting arrangements in existence now. It's a very important site that could do different things. So yeah, the school district is there.
Would public use of the land take priority over private use of the land, I would hope?
Well, the way this, I imagine this just runs, with the city does have a surplus property process where they do give priority to public, well, they first give priority to city departments, and then they give second priority to other public departments. So yes, public is at top of the line before the private.
In the use of that,
Yes.
I mean, schools.
For any city-owned property, yeah. Someone over here.
Yeah, I'm interested to know if there are examples, you've described ways that public agencies can partner to support multiple uses on a site. I work for the port, and we often partner with public agencies, but we also partner with private enterprise in public-private partnerships to support developing public benefits. Is that something Parks Department has done in Seattle?
You know, we have certainly been done around the country where developers have partnered with parks departments to create parks within developments. We have tried, and we've had some limited success up on First Hill working with a developer where they're going to incorporate a public park within their development. I think it's something we're totally open to. It seems like they don't pencil particularly well for the value of some of the properties in Seattle. For the Parks Department to come in and put $1 million or $2 dollars into the equation doesn't really pencil for a 30-story building that's worth $200 million. So it hasn't worked, but we're totally willing to do it.
I think we're at the point to kind of have a broader conversation. I expect there'll be more questions for Alex or for Chip, but I'd like to use the remainder of our time to surface issues, questions, concerns. And again, we want to take away from this meeting those very things. And I guess our best way to do it, it's a little old school, but we've got index cards. Well, where are they, Ellen, Gino? People have them? Okay. I mean, you've got lots of ways to give us input, but we want to know what you're thinking right now. Clearly, this is a very early conversation, and I really want to thank SPU for coming and talking to us. They could, well, it's our city government, so they don't say no. But they could have been much more difficult and Dan and Alex, struck a chord, and here we are, and I feel good about that. I feel much more informed now than I did before, and with the proper background too, and appreciation for public safety and service issues, which I think we're all concerned about. But there clearly remains some possibility of use, alternative use, under different scenarios, lids, smaller, bigger, and so now I think is the time to start hearing about different issues, ideas, concerns. I'm sure I haven't thought of them all, so let's start over here.
Great presentations, very informative. With respect to using that land to turn it into something, park of some form, I think it would help. We know there's a lot of processes that have to happen and negotiation, yada, yada, yada. Some kind of a rough schedule, like when could we expect X to happen? When could we expect Y to happen? At what point down the road will whatever it is that it's going to be there? How far in advance are we looking?
Please, Alex,
Sure.
if you can.
I think that the general idea is we're just really looking forward to the end of 2016 when we have a better idea where this reservoir fits in our overall profile for the water system. I could give you a general flavor for how long it's taken for other reservoirs that have gotten lids, for example, to go forward. We don't have a lot of examples of reservoirs that we've surplused and then converted to other uses through a fair surplus property process. In general, it takes about 5+ or longer years sometimes in order to get all of the ducks in a row. Covering the reservoir is technically pretty straightforward. Structural, mechanical, electrical elements. It's the park's planning process, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but in vetting the community input before you can design anything on top is what takes up a lot of the time. In order to just cover a reservoir, it might take 2 years, from planning through design and construction, maybe a little longer, maybe a little shorter. But it's everything else that brings the complexity into the schedule.
But the real key milestone is the end of the seismic study a year or so from now.
Correct.
I mean, that's the big event out there on the process flow chart. I think we've got that. Heidi?
Kind of to that point, do you anticipate a process for letting the public know about the results of the study and specifically results as they relate to the Roosevelt Reservoir? And the prior studies in the decommissioning period, is that out on a web page or anything that you've been studying up to this point? That's sort of now changed because you've got the seismic study going on, but kind of the results of original expectations of decommissioning period.
I think what we have on the webpage, and I should check before I say exactly, is our standard language that we're telling people who are calling, asking about the reservoir, which is essentially the same as I've said. We're postponing that pending the seismic study. We don't have a lot of background posted. It's just a little too technical for what most folks are calling to ask about. Most of the people who call just want to know what's the status and when can I get an update. So we have not outlined our public information and participation process once that seismic study is done, primarily because the seismic study itself is so large in scale that kind of dwarfs, it dwarfs the Roosevelt decision because it affects so much more of the water system on a greater scale. So we're focusing most of our public information planning focus on that effort at this point. But I can say, with some security that we'll be back here, other local neighborhood areas, just to let folks know. And there's a separate effort with Volunteer Reservoir as well.
Put it on your calendar, Heidi.
Yeah, bank on it.
I'm sorry?
How did the map get decided? I mean, who was that?
Sure. Well, there's an idea. John, you want to answer the question about how that came to be?
Oh, that one? Yeah.
Go for it.
That is well, let me first say, I'm a hockey coach as well as a port planner. And I'm here with my son, who's a hockey player and a fellow coach. And we've had an interest in, well, we've recognized for years there are no ice rinks in the city of Seattle. 15 largest cities in the country, we're the only one without an ice rink. People like in a northern city to ice skate. So we started thinking, where can we work to promote an ice rink? And we looked at Magnuson, found that it was kind of detached from I-5, which is where a lot of people who enjoy ice hockey and figure skating come from. And then we saw the sign up at the Roosevelt Reservoir, and I live 2 blocks from the reservoir, and I thought, well, actually, this is my son's idea. I said, let's build an ice rink there. So we started playing around and spreading the word, and got lots of people who suddenly said, well, we would invest in such a facility.